When I look back on the somber records of 1895, I find myself drawn to a case unlike any I have published before. It was a case that shook the very foundations of London society, not just for the horror of the crimes, but for the dark shadows it cast upon the concepts of justice and friendship. In those foggy autumn days, we faced a mystery that tested not only our intellect, but our very humanity, forcing us to question the fine line between enforcing the law and achieving absolute justice. It began on a typical London day in November. A thick fog crept like a phantom through Baker Street. Holmes was hunched over his microscope, intensely studying a salt crystal, while I tried to ignore an old ache in my shoulder. Suddenly, the doorbell rang with a violent urgency, heralding the arrival of Inspector Lestrade. He burst in, breathless, with news of 3 mysterious deaths at the prestigious Admiral's Club. These were men of high society, all found dead with terrifying symptoms that suggested the plague. Yet no one else had been infected. It was clear that death was not choosing its victims at random. Our investigation led us to the club's kitchen. There, Holmes's sharp eyes noticed the trembling hands of the chef, Michael Griggs, and an old scar on his wrist. A relic from his time in the Afghan War, it was there, amidst the clatter of pots and pans, that Holmes found a microscopic black seed, the key to the entire puzzle. Back in our rooms at 221B Baker Street, analysis revealed a complex poison, one that didn't kill the body but attacked the mind. It forced its victims to confront their deepest fears and darkest deeds until they died from sheer terror. This was not a simple murder, it was a form of psychological execution. We traced the poison source to a shadowy dealer in Limehouse. This led us down a rabbit hole to an even more painful truth. It turned out that the victims were the commanding officers behind a brutal massacre in Afghanistan. A horrific event that had been officially covered up and erased from the records. We learned that Griggs was not the mastermind, but a broken tool, a pawn in the hands of a trained medical mind who understood the deep scars of war and trauma. The pieces were falling into place. But the final picture was more horrifying than I could have imagined. Holmes asked me to examine the blood samples from the victims. My medical expertise confirmed his suspicions about the nature of the poison, but the true shock came when he confronted me with the full truth. He had found the small blue vial. He had found the ring of the 5th Fusiliers amongst my possessions, and in that moment, he knew that I was the one behind the circle of poison. I confessed everything. I told him how the legal system had failed the innocent victims of the massacre. I argued that I hadn't murdered those men. I had simply forced them to face their own consciences. For poor Michael Griggs, this act of retribution had given his suffering a purpose. But Holmes faced me, his face a mask of anger and pain. He said that as a doctor, I had betrayed my oath, turning myself into a judge, jury, and executioner. He was right, of course, but righteousness felt like a cold comfort in the face of such injustice. We stood there, face to face, in the harshest moment Baker Street had ever known. Our long friendship, the countless adventures, the shared trust, it all hung in the balance. When the time came to make a decision, Holmes, the man who lived by logic and truth, chose to lie for the first and only time in his life. He told Lestrade and the police that Griggs was the sole culprit and had taken his own life. Then, with his own hands, he burned the evidence that implicated me, saving my freedom but destroying something sacred between us forever. Our friendship was never the same after that day. A wall of ice grew between us, one that no fire could ever melt. We continued our work, but the easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by a polite, professional distance. I realized then that the circle of poison hadn't just killed 3 corrupt officers. It had also killed the bond between Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson. And that, I must confess, was the greatest tragedy of all. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing for more tales from the chronicles of my time with the world's greatest detective.